Welcome to Never Again Is Now, a podcast about anti-Semitism. I am Evelyn Marcus.
And I am Phyllis Zembler Miller.
What do schools in the Middle East teach children about Jews? And how do the media there talk about Jews? We discuss this and more with our guest today, who knows this from experience and who follows the Arab media closely. Mansour Al-Hajj is the director of the Reform Project at MEMRI, the Middle East Media Research Institute. He grew up in Saudi Arabia and studied Sharia law or Islamic law and humanitarian law at the International University of Africa in Khartoum, Sudan. Mansour has participated in multiple briefings on Capitol Hill about extremism in the Muslim world. He's based in the Washington, D.C. area, where I met him at a conference of the Clarity Coalition, a coalition of Muslims, ex-Muslims, and others who are concerned by the threats to liberty and peace posed by Islamists in various places in the world. Mansour, thank you so much for coming to our show.
Thank you for having me.
Can you please tell us a bit about the mission and the work of the Middle East Media Research Institute, or MEMRI?
Okay. Well, of course, there are other people who can say it better, but MEMRI's basic mission and style or idea is based on bridging the language gap between the East and the West. And oftentimes when people talk in different languages, it could be maybe a little challenging. Maybe it could be because of the audience. Maybe it could be because so many reasons and factors. They wouldn't say exactly what they intended to say. And even myself now, I would have loved it much more if I were speaking to you in Arabic, because it's my first language. But with MEMRI, it's about reflecting what the Arabs and Persians, or now maybe even the Chinese and the Russians say in their own gathering, in their own setting, in their own forums and YouTube videos or Friday sermons or their own newspaper. MEMRI has the expertise and knowledge and expert analyst and reporter who understand the local languages and use it to translate these factual information. And most of the time there is an analysis, but also the mere the raw data that we get and translate accurately for people to see. And when you go to MEMRI, you will see all of that. And without MEMRI saying anything, you can sense the differences, when politicians or activists speak in Arabic and versus what they speak in English. And to me, it is really fascinating, and MEMRI has been doing an amazing job in this regard.
Yes, I agree.
Giving people a source where they can go and see for themselves how people talk about themselves.
Yes, so I agree. I'm very interested in the developments in the Middle East. I cannot read Arab or Persian newspapers. I don't master those languages, but when I go to the MEMRI website, I can get a great impression of things that are being said and written there in media, and also in public speaking events sometimes, and even when that is happening in the West. I can also find that at MEMRI. So it's a great resource.
Thank you.
And I just want to say, for those of you who need to see word spelled that it's actually capital M, capital E, capital M, capital R, capital I. Because every time I hear it, I think of the English word to have a memory. And again, it stands for Middle East Media Research Institute. We will provide the URL in the description of this talk. So let's go back to your childhood. Let's talk about your upbringing in Saudi Arabia. And what did they teach you in school about Jews?
All right. Well, I was born in Mecca, actually a few miles away from the Grand Mosque, and I grew up in Jeddah. My grandmother from my mother's side immigrated to Saudi Arabia in the late 70s and spent the rest of her life there. In fact, she is buried in Saudi Arabia. My mom was 6 years old when she first got in Saudi Arabia, so my mom grew up there.
Where did she
And
come
met
from? Where does your mother come from?
Chad,
Yeah.
Okay.
right, with her mom. And there is a very interesting story about how my grandmother moved to Saudi Arabia and why, but this is maybe for another interview.
Okay.
But to make a long story short, my mom married when she was quite young, maybe 13, 14. So the differences between me and my mom is 14 or 15 years old. So I am now 45 and she is 60. It just turned 6, and it's a very interesting thing. So growing up in Saudi Arabia, I grew up at the time or around the time that described in Saudi history as the Sahwa time. And the Sahwa time, I'm talking now about my teenage years when I was 12, 13, 14. And I went to Saudi school, primary school and middle school. And also I attended the Quranic school, Quran memorization school. So this is in the afternoon, we would go to that. In Saudi schools, it was religion loaded, heavily loaded religious studies, meaning we have maybe 5 to 6 classes of religion: Quran, interpretation, jurisprudence, biography of Muhammad, and history of Islam. And it's like 5 or 6 or 7 of them. And we get them on the daily basis, in addition to math and science and English and all that. And the teachings, absolutely, as some of the American enterprises and institutes and organizations made studies about the curriculum and school books in Saudi Arabia, and it was pretty anti-Semitic and talking about, for instance, talking about the eternal enmity between Jews and Muslims, and that at the end of the day there would be a fight, and the Jews would be hiding behind trees and stones or rocks, and Muslims and these trees and rocks would talk and ask the Muslim to come and kill the Jews behind them. And also, talking about importance of liberating the entire Palestine and kicking the Jews out, or have them been subjugated to Islamic rules and all of that. And it was that heavy material about anti-Jewish, and also talking. And then when I would go to the Quranic memorization school, it's controlled by Islamists, and they have this eternal idea of or they heavily focus on the concept of jihad and how Muslims should preach Islam, invite other people to become Muslim and convert to Islam, and the ultimate goal of having a strong Islamic army to regain Muslims or restore Muslims' dominance over the world and all that. So it's a mission. And I just want to share one example that I didn't know exactly about the nature of it until I came to the US, and then until I grew up and understood what exactly it meant. It was a summer camp one of these years when I was in middle school, and it was organized by my Quran memorization school, and they took us to um, basically a deserted area where there was a villa or two, and we stationed there. And during the day, it was similar to a camp, actually, military camp. And they didn't teach us any, shooting or anything, but it was based on the idea of that Muslims should always be prepared to, be a fighter and all that. So they taught us some wrestling, and we slept in an open area, and they dedicated some of the students to guard, at night, an hour or two, and then wake up their colleagues, and rotate over the night to do that. And even though it's a nice thing, to protect your friends in a deserted area and all that, but it was coming from Islamic perspective of, this is part of jihad. This is part of how Muslims should be. And there is one famous hadith that says, the person who would guard, or um, stay awake while his comrades are sleeping, would not be tortured in hellfire and all that. So it was interesting for me to learn later that that was the intent of it.
And then
Right.
what happened? How did you leave this milieu?
Oh, how did I become who I am today?
Yes,
It's
I
also
mean,
a very long story, but I think my first it didn't happen until after college. Basically, I mean, even during college, I went to one of the Islamist famous colleges in Sudan, and it was heavily controlled by the Islamist movement. And it was an international university where students come from all across Africa and the world. There's some American there, there's some Malaysian and Indonesian, and from across the world, including Europe and East Europe. And it was managed and directed by the Sudan Islamists to expand their version of Islam across the world. And interestingly enough, some of the students who went to my university are now among the leaders in some of the terrorist organization like Al-Shabaab movement and some other part of the world where Islamists are taking roots and establishing themselves. So so after college, I went back to Saudi Arabia. So my journey to Saudi Arabia, from Saudi Arabia back to Saudi Arabia. So I was not allowed to go to high school in Saudi Arabia after graduating middle school, because I was not a Saudi citizen, uh, even with all that background that I gave you, because my father was not a Saudi, therefore I was not considered a Saudi. So I was denied education in Saudi Arabia, and I had to go to Chad, where my father moved, um, because of some political issues he was doing. So at age 14, I went to Chad for high school, graduated, and then went to Sudan for college. So after graduation from Sudan, I went back to Saudi Arabia. That was 2002, 2003. And I was working, different type of work, nothing solid. And I run into this article that was written by a very intelligent man. And in the article, he mentioned that it's allowed in Islam for people to think even about the existence of God himself. Because prior to that, whenever I think outside the the knowledge and the frame of Islam, I would feel bad because we were told that whenever you have doubt in your heart, it means that you are not a good Muslim. So it was a scary feeling. So I would just disregard these ideas. And when I heard something like that from a Muslim person, and he was a Muslim, and he prays and he believes in Islam and all that. When he said that, I think he opened the horizon for me to just read about anything. And this is how it started. So I started consuming his article, and then I started reading books, any books that I can see, ask question, and I turned the answers into questions. And I was very lucky to win the green card lottery to come to the US. So I had to go to Egypt to wait for the visa. And in Egypt, I stayed in Alexandria for a few months. This is where all started, all of this craving for knowledge started. I I could say I was living inside the Library of Alexandria, because I would go there every morning and then leave at the evening, every single day. And all I did was just read anything, reading and reading. And there are a few brave and intelligent Arab writers who address the issues of, Islamism, address the issue of contradictions in Islam, address the issues of, you know, Western civilization and all that. So I consumed all that knowledge, and it led me to where I am now.
And do you consider yourself a Muslim still?
Well, according maybe to my own thing, but I don't believe in any religion myself.
Okay.
But
Okay.
I would not also give those Islamists the right to kick me out of Islam, because I can also say, well, I am the real Muslim, not you guys.
Okay.
So
And yeah,
I can play this game too. But as I have a lot of writings out there. I wrote a lot. I spoke a lot about Islam and a lot of the things that I don't like, and that's considered blasphemy. And you know about the blasphemy laws and all that.
yes. And so you have changed. Saudi Arabia has changed. We'll get to that later in the interview. But please tell us about the project for reform that you lead at the Middle East Media Research Institute.
Yeah,
What
the
is that
reform.
project about?
Yeah, the reform project simply is a glimpse of light, that when we say the Middle East, when we say Muslim and Arab countries, they're not all the same, and not everybody's thinking the same way. This is what Arab nationalists and the Islamists want to tell you. They want to say, oh, the Muslim world, they all say this, they all say that. No, there are a big group of people, waves of people who are different, and who disagree with a lot of things, who believe in liberty and human rights, who are tolerant towards minorities, not only the Jews, but the Christians and the Yazidis and the Ismailis and everybody who is not the majority in the country. And they believe in the rule of law. They believe in, sorry, they believe in the rule of law. They believe in democracy, freedom, human rights. At this project, we highlighted their voices and amplified them and present them to the Western world, where, we can say, well, there is still hope. We're still hoping. And it's unfortunately, we can say it's a long way journey, but some have taken that way. And, I don't know, is fortunately or unfortunately, many of them at some point would leave the area, because it's really difficult if you live in some of these oppressive countries and try to express something that the government doesn't like or the Islamists don't like. Most likely you'll be in trouble. You'll get in trouble if you don't lose your freedom. Maybe you would feel alone and isolated, and mostly, you would plan to just immigrate to the West and all that. I really hope that, in the West would focus on attracting all these voices. Unfortunately, the West, they don't discriminate against people. This is why, and this is how we ended up with all these Islamists that now are more radical than the Islamists in the Middle East. Using the voices, using the concept of freedom of speech and democracy to sabotage freedom of speech and democracy, to discriminate against minorities, to spread hate, and to bring everything that they ran away from into their host nation. And instead of being grateful for a nation that hosted them, offered them, treat them with equality and dignity and all that, they feel unhappy and they look unhappy. They look hostile to their host nations. So that's
So you're saying people who are not for freedom and democracy coming from Muslim majority countries get more attention than the people who do advocate for freedom and democracy coming from Muslim majority countries?
in the West, you mean?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, sadly, because they know how the West think, how liberals think, and they know how to play the identity politics. And, therefore, they push it. They push for, let's say, hijab, even though, there are plenty of Muslim women who don't wear the hijab, but they don't consider them as Muslim because they're pushing for identity politics, and also they're pushing an extreme version of Islam in the West.
So,
And
and for those of us who are interested in those more liberal voices of Muslim background, they could go to your project and find those voices. Is that correct?
yes, yeah, absolutely. And yeah, you could go to the Reform Project at Memory. You'll see plenty of voices that you would be surprised that they do exist. But there are plenty of voices, and some of these voices are also from the West, but because they are originally from Muslim background countries, we also include them. We highlight their positions that completely contradict the position of the Islamists, because
Could you
they
give us
can.
I'm
I'm
sorry,
sorry.
but could you give us an example of a program under Project Reform? In other words, do you send speakers to churches or do you have youth groups? Just a couple of examples of what you've.
So it's mostly we translate or subtitle their articles or their public appearances. Even sometimes their Twitter posts and posts that they post on social media platform like TikTok or YouTube or Facebook. And we just highlight them and present them. Some of these voices, for example, are now against Hamas. You don't see them much, and absolutely you wouldn't see them on Al Jazeera because Al Jazeera is a Muslim Brotherhood entity that only highlights the Muslim Brotherhood agenda and propaganda. So you will see some different voices that you wouldn't see in other places, unfortunately, unless you're concerned and very active observer of the topic. You wouldn't see it. And this is what unfortunately shows the voices or the side that a lot of the people in the West do not see. And when Islam is presented as one thing where there are multiple views, this is where the danger came from. But if Muslims in the West have different views, even within their mosque and within their Islamic institution, it would really make things very easy, very simple. But the sad reality is these organizations and institutions have been controlled, by the Islamists, and therefore now I would say they hijacked the Muslim voices in the United States and in the West to just follow their political agenda and their Islamist agenda that really doesn't care about freedom or human rights. They only use these as tools because they live in the West, they understand how the West operates, and they just capitalize on these aspects, and they get their share on the table. Some of them have been invited to the White House and campaigned with in presidential campaigns and all that, and they do these things to further push their agendas. They are not for anything but for expanding their their version of Islam and their propaganda and their intolerance and hate for non-Muslims. That's basically it.
Yes, unfortunately, throughout the West, Muslim communities are represented towards the government, for instance, in the West, are represented by groups that are more for Islamism, which is political Islam and very orthodox Islam, and not are not represented by reform Muslims who are much more for a liberal um, um, style of Islam and the Muslim community, and but and also in our interfaith dialogues, we often dialogue with the the political orthodox Islamist groups and not with the reformers. But if for those of us who are interested in contacting reformers, go to Mansour's website at Memory at Middle East Media, what is it, Research Institute, to the Reform Project and find these reformers, contact them, or go to the claritycoalition.org and find a lot of reformers there. And they're actually, in my opinion, much more interesting to dialogue with and to talk with than with those who represent, an ideology that we don't really want in the West.
So when we're
Please.
looking at the Middle East in publications that are published in Farsi or Arabic or another language from a Islam majority country, what do they say about the Jews? They just say terrible things all the time?
Unfortunately, yeah, unless you find a moderate voice here or there, but mostly it is negative. And now most of the negativities are coming from Qatar, where we have the biggest military base in the Middle East, yet they are the biggest ally of the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas in particular, especially after October 7 and even before that. And the writings is really way anti-Semitism. They spread a lot of anti-Semitism, and they're very hateful against the Jews, and they spread all the nasty, Quranic verses, the hadith, the saying of the Prophet that talk about the, eternal enmity between Muslim and Jews, that Israel is a colonial entity, expansion of Western colonialism, and they have to be, pack their bags and move where they came from. And a lot of people believe it. And sadly enough, the regular layman people you know, because they have consumed this propaganda all their lives, it is very difficult for them to see something else. It's very difficult for them to even reconsider. They don't even know it because it comes out naturally. You know, I remember my brother, little brother, years ago, he saw a caterpillar, you know, a big giant caterpillar, and he was maybe 4 or 5, and he called that Israel, you know, because the media was focusing on Israel destroying houses and all that. So he didn't even know the name of the caterpillar. He called it Israel is outside. So it seeped into the consciousness of you know, a lot of Muslims. And you know, when you talk to them, when you present the facts to them, when you present them, you know, the mere idea, so the mere fact or the ideas that we can all advocate for peace and coexistence, it doesn't resonate to them. It does not. It does not hit any piece of brain inside their minds, because for them there is only a zero-sum game. It's either us or the Israelis. We cannot coexist, and that's unfortunate. And you know, one of the shocking things to me, I have a friend that I've known for a long time, and she's been calling me almost every day after October 7th saying, oh, the US is controlled by Zionist, and, you know, all the countries under them, they control America, and go watch this, go watch that. You know, because she was a friend of mine. I tried not to challenge her and listen to her, you know, maybe she has family there. I don't want to, you know, add to her thing, but it just became unbearable. And you know, I said, let me just be a little devil advocate here. I say, and I said to her, I said, why are these people fighting? Why? They don't have the capability. They are, you know, overpowered. We know that. They spend the billions of dollars that they were given. Instead of building above tunnel, they dig underground and built tunnel. They made these useless rockets instead of improving the well-beings of their people. And now they carried out attack and they killed people. And now they want ceasefire. Well, there was ceasefire before October 7th. There was ceasefire. And if that's what they wanted, it was there. They are the one who broke it. So I just don't understand. And she hung up the phone on me and she never talked to me again after that. So this is just tiny examples about, I said, it is sad to cause people death. And it is sad to see people dying. Nobody like that. But for sadly, the propaganda has seeped into these people that they cannot see beyond this point. Like, let me say this. Even they cannot see beyond this point. When you say peace and coexistence, they don't understand it. They do not, it doesn't hit anything in them. And that's really unfortunate for me. It is
Yeah.
very unfortunate.
Let's look at the Middle East today and some positive developments there. Some countries like the United Arab Emirates and also Saudi Arabia have started to collaborate with Israel militarily or economically or both. What do schools in these countries teach the students about Jews today? Is that different from when you were a student there?
Well, I don't have any solid data, but I read a few reports that say there have been improvement even in Saudi Arabia. You know, the curriculum has changed a lot, and now they're pushing toward more understanding and tolerance, and that's commendable. You know, for United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia to do so, it's a commendable thing. Yet the Islamists, when they say Islam is the religion of peace and we love peace and all that, when countries make peace, they're upset. They don't like it. They would say these are traitors, these are Arab Zionists, and they're only doing this for their own sake. And they just cannot see beyond what they have. And, if you don't, and here, one of the biggest differences between Jewish and Israeli dissidents who don't agree, with the policies of Netanyahu or, in other parties, and those who oppose the Islamists. If you or me oppose the Islamists, first of all, they don't have presence. They would not be tolerated in Gaza or the West Bank or anywhere, even here in the West. When you say something different, you're already labeled. Some people maybe would, call you an apostate for that. So I really like the forward-looking approach by the leadership in Saudi Arabia and in the United Arab Emirates. I understand the position of Israel to, seek agreement and understanding with, these countries. However, there are voices inside Saudi Arabia and inside the United Arab Emirates that we don't hear because of the regime there. They're not democracy there, right? And they wouldn't allow even, the most basic human rights, even if people who are not intolerant and all that, to just express themselves. And I think, as somebody who lived there, and I have some friends in Saudi Arabia who are not bad people, and they are imprisoned, and I don't like that, honestly, to be honest. And I think it's a long way, but I think it's a good position. It's if they open the dialogue for people, I think with a reasonable amount of freedom, people can reach that conclusion, because suppression, again, is not the right way to move forward. And if you want a free society, if you want people to come to the conclusion where peace is good and violence and intolerance is bad, you have to open it up, I think. You have to open up, you have to open, for dialogue, you have to open for understanding and discussion, so people can reach that conclusion and, start living and let other people live. But it's hard. I cannot see that happening through oppression.
Yes.
Let's switch now to the United States after October 7th. And I understand that you did some research in mosques in the United States after that time. And what did you hear being preached in those mosques?
Yeah, so I happened to be listening to a lot of Friday sermons right after October 7th. And I was really shocked. This is why I decided to just dig deeper and see what's going on. And I have listened to more than 250 sermons.
In Arabic, am I right?
No, most of them are in English.
Interesting. Okay, go
English
ahead.
and Arabic. And this is why I said the danger now is going from the west to the east, because all these schools that were built in the US started producing preacher in perfect English preaching anti-Semitism and hate, which it's unfortunate again. So I was shocked, first of all, to find out that absolutely no one condemned Hamas. Maybe a few did, I heard, but I did not see them. I heard that somebody saying I did it. I said I condemned Hamas, but most of these sermons consider Hamas's October 7 attacks legitimate. They said, this is what the prophet did. This is the right to do. They're under occupation. They did not say that that was horrific, attacking civilians, people during their celebration or carrying out an attack, and then calling for ceasefire, which it's crazy. You cannot start a war and then say, no, okay, I was kidding. Let's stop the war now. No. If you start something, you don't have the right to stop it. If you start something, you don't have the right to stop. So I was shocked, first of all, to see almost all these Friday sermons were identical. People have the same line of thinking. And based on my experience as somebody who went to Sharia school, I know that I know that it is prohibited in Islam, first of all, to kill elderly people or to kidnap kids or all that. These are things that prohibited in Islam and shouldn't be allowed to be done. Yet, I don't know what it is, but I think it is just because they're Islamists and mostly they've been told what to say. They amplified their support for Hamas. They said it was no condemnation, meaning they agree with the attack. So that was shocking
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah.
And then, and they didn't even condemn other leaders of Hamas who said, well, people in Vietnam, people in Algeria, they didn't care about their own population. They said millions of people killed in other countries to get their independence, and we are willing to pay that price. Yeah, they're outside, they 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 risk people's life for nothing. And even the basic lessons from history are not being considered by these imam. The life of the Palestinians get worse every time they start attacks, and they don't see that. And I bet you now, as soon as the war starts, they will say we're victorious, we won the war. How they think this way, I do not understand, but unfortunately, this is how they think.
And
So I dig down and I found this horrific example, and I want every one of your listeners to read that report and to see the videos, because the entire report we reference all the sermons in the United States. I didn't even include the one from Canada because I wanted to focus on mosque inside the United States, and you will see the most horrific things, the most horrible things being cited against the Jews
and where can we find
support
this
of
report?
Hamas.
Where can we find this report?
In
Mansour?
memory, at memory, it's called challenging the dominant perspective, the violent perspective. I can send you the link if you want.
Okay,
Yes.
would be
If that's
good.
what you
I'll
want.
add it to this.
Yeah,
And
I
Mansour,
sent it to you, I believe, at some point.
okay, we will include that in with this episode. So, um, do you have any facts about how many Muslims in the United States have had a similar reaction to October 7, or who are, thinking along similar lines as what you found in these sermons in the United States in mosques?
So again, I would say I don't have numbers. I don't do polls and stuff, and I don't know how you can do that. But we have the sermons, and I think most ordinary Muslims do not believe in what these preachers have been saying. I really don't think so, because these are radical views, and people go to mosque because they feel like they're religiously obligated to go. And they ask for donation because this imam tells them, if you want to go to heaven, Allah said you have to give your money. So they give their money. And it's a way for them to cleanse from, what these imam perceives as the sins and, transgression that they commit. I honestly believe most of the Muslims in the United States are not radical. If we get a chance to cleanse these mosques from this horrible preacher, I think we are gonna be better. And the unfortunate thing is that they don't even allow uh, what do you call it, elections in these mosques.
Oh,
Most of these imams are appointed with, and of course there is an entity behind that, focusing on the affiliation of these imams to support the world view that they're pushing in the West. And there is this individual, he is a Palestinian, part of the PLO or something, and he's based in Canada. And one of the horrible thing that he said about October 7, and I don't know how he said it, but he said that the fact that Hamas tricked the Israelis to believe that they are not intending to carry out any attack for the longest time. And then yet they carried out October 7 successfully. He said that was the strategic goal or strategic, move. And he just did not know that that exact thing would make the life of the Palestinian more difficult, because even the thing that Israel was planning to do, or to let go, or to uh, uh, at least not consider in case there is a peaceful resolution happening, that would make things even more difficult now, because that tells you that there is an intention to annihilate the Jews. There is an intention to not let the Jews live, or the Israeli live in peace, to that they really don't believe in coexistence, period. While there are thousands of Arabs in Israel, I visited Israel and I loved it. They wouldn't allow a single Jews in Palestine, or the future Palestine, if it were to happen. And it's just pure craziness. So again, when it comes to these mosques, and this is an idea that I'm considering with a friend of mine now, and I think it would make a huge impact, that we are going to first expose and ridicule and respond to the absurdities, to the craziness, to the the intolerant messages that these imams are promoting. Because one of the things that I struggled with when I was young, that I would take everything the imam says as truth. But now, as I see them, I laugh every time they say something crazy, something not real, something that is conspiracy, based on conspiracy theory, something that inconsistent, something that said the opposite of the previous Friday. People don't keep that. Now I have all this record of these sermons. I'm hoping to start this as soon as I can, where we can just put their clips, put what they say, and tell people that this is simply not true. This is simply bad. This is simply this and that. So people can, whenever they see it, sometimes they can make the correlations, and hopefully we can free a lot of these young mind and souls from, the yoke of oppression and religious intolerance.
I think that would be a very, very important forward step. Evelyn, I highly recommend this idea that you're just talking about. We're coming to the end of our podcast. So, two things. Is there anything that our individual listeners can do to help with your work? And is there anything, final words that you wanted to say to our listeners?
Yeah, so always find somebody who is forward thinking and try to support them, try to, share their post, to hear them out, to um, promote them. If you go to anywhere, if you go somewhere where people want to have a different perspective, these are the voices. As we do with the Colority Coalition, these are the voices we wanted to put forward and present at any event, at any organization, at any media forum or schools, because it's not always black and white. There are variety of voices within the Muslim community, and this is a fun thing that when they say, oh, the Islamic world, we are what, 2 billion, yet the Sunnis will exclude the Shias, and the Shias exclude the Sunnis, and they don't consider the Reforms as Muslims, and they don't consider the Sufis as Muslim. They're within all these divisions. They just love the fact that there are bigger numbers. And sadly, and this is also, we posted it at Memory. There is this Kuwaiti man. He's an Islamist, one of the Muslim Brotherhood leader. His name is Tariq Suwaidan. He was educated in the US. His daughter was educated in the US and all that. I think he's based in Qatar now. And he said, it doesn't matter the people who are killed in Palestine. He said they don't matter because Muslims are 2 billion and Israelis are 7 million. And it just tells you. And he said, well, the Israelis invest a lot of money on their people, yet, Muslim women can just give birth like that. So they even use the biology of Muslims to further their hateful agenda. And this is really, if I have a final message, I would say Islamism is a disease that we all should be united to fight, because I believe most people are peaceful and just want peace. And if you promote peace instead of violence, if you promote love instead of hate, that's more reasonable. And imagine if these imams are pushing for peace. Imagine that. Imagine Muslims in the West and in Europe telling the Islamists, no, this is not the way. We have example. Please read my report. This is not the way. We have people, we live in the West, people are living peacefully. Jews, Hindus, everybody. You have your neighbor, I live my life, you live your life. We don't have to follow your zero-sum game. We are Muslims and we have experienced love and inclusion. We want to promote that. How about we give you that and try it? It's gonna work because it has worked here. Maybe it worked for you. Imagine, instead of carrying the same message that we grew up hearing all these years and just recycling them every year. The one thing that the Muslims don't do, to reconsider their crazy ideas. It's a good thing to reflect and ponder and say, well, maybe we're wrong. Maybe let's give this a chance. Maybe let's give that a chance, instead of just pushing and pushing for a zero-sum game and recalling all these verses from the Quran and Hadith about the end of the day war. And today I hear this Imam saying it. Today I was listening to a YouTube channel and he said, well, their destruction, meaning the Jews, is coming, and this time is going to be by the hand of Muslims. And he is based in New Jersey.
Wow.
Well,
Sorry to end on this negative note, but it is dangerous, and
we have to hear it.
Has
We
to
have
be
to
addressed seriously.
we
Yes.
have to hear it. Yes.
And we're very appreciative that you took the time to come on our show and share this with us And we thank you so much for coming on, and hope that our listeners take your warning seriously and do whatever they can in their small or big way to fight against this negative movement of the Islamists against peace. And for those of you who want to know more about Evelyn and myself and our work, you can go to Never Again Is Now podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And as we end all our episodes, we say, please speak up against anti-Semitism and all hate.